Welcome back to another episode of the Miami Heat Roundtable. My name is Amir. I'm joined today by Martel. You can find him at the Miami Heat Zone podcast. And we have another special guest joining the show today. We have Adam Barai. How's it going, man?
It's going well. How's it going with you guys?
Doing well? Yeah. So before we do get started on today's episode, Adam, I'm sure a lot of our audience know who you are already, but for those that do you want to just do a quick introduction to get started?
Sure. Wow, no one's ever asked me that. But I I'm currently a lawyer in training. I've written for a few sites, a few publications, Sports Illustrated, Bleacher Report, and a few others, fan-sided here and there. And my love for the Heat started, I think, after D Wade won his first championship in '06. And we just went off from there. I graduated from UM. I'm not a Miami and Florida native, but I like to think that I'm sort of from the area at this point. And and yeah, there's not much to it. I'm not an entertaining or interesting guy at all. So
That's not true at all. And I'm also not a Miami guy. Martel is from uh Broward, right? So he's close to Miami, but I live in California. I've been a Heat fan since 1998. So, and I've been to Miami plenty of times, obviously throughout the years, and went to a game with Martel and actually met him in person. And we went to was a game 3 against Boston, which was like
Yeah.
horrible experience, fun experience to
oof.
meet you in person. But I went to both games, so I flew from San Francisco to Miami for both games. So not a fun experience at all, as we know how that ended. But again, Adam, thanks for joining the program. Trent just hopped on. Trent, how's it going?
What
You're
up,
good.
man? What up? What up? What up? I'm at work right now, but the grind don't stop. Nice to meet you.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Let's get
nice to meet you too, Trent.
started. Awesome. So let's get started. So, Adam, we've had some guests come on, and I like to start off with the same question during the off season, and we've had mixed answers from different people. But the biggest question right now that Miami Heat are facing this summer, besides tomorrow, which is the draft of who are we going to draft, the biggest elephant in the room right now is Jimmy Butler's extension for $113 million, and so the Miami Heat front office said they're undecided right now and they're not having that conversation yet. And so there is some speculation that we are going to wait and see. And there's some speculation that we might trade Jimmy Butler. And there's also speculation that we might cave and just offer that extension. And there's been a lot of smoke lately around Jimmy Butler with was it Alan Hahn and then Howard Beck and other insiders and executives saying that they think that Jimmy Butler has played his last game in a Miami Heat uniform. So just wanted to get your perspective on the whole situation and your prediction of how is this going to pan out this offseason.
Let me first state that I love Jimmy Butler. I think the 5 years that he spent in the Miami Heat organization have been of the most fun that I've had watching a player play for an organization. The way he just took the mantle of being a Heat guy through and through and embracing the organization immediately is something that's really empowering. Um, that being said, you got to trade him. You have to trade him. Or at those crossroads at this point where the franchise is behind, and they're behind in this arms race of assets that we've seen all across the NBA. I was someone who was a big proponent of trading Jimmy the moment the finals had ended last year, and I know that that was just a very uncomfortable and unpopular thing to even conceive or think about. But the writing was sort of on the wall where you're not going to get to that highest of highs again with Jimmy Butler at his age, with those injuries, with that roster, and you have to make that decision. I know that it's only an extra year technically of an extension, but those are decisions that can cripple a franchise and keep them in that purgatory of being the 10 through the 7 seed and not actually winning anything of relevance, right? We've already hit that mountaintop of getting to the finals. we need to see something better than that. I mean, what's another finals appearance going to do for the Miami Heat or for Jimmy Butler? There's no point, right? Getting to Eastern Conference Finals and then what? We're just going to keep playing this song and dance over and over again. The only one who benefits from it is Mickey, getting more playoff ticket sales. And it's sad to say, but that might actually be the main goal for the ownership group, to have more ticket sales, to get more home playoff games, and be content with that, and not really spend too much to get a roster that's ready for a championship run. That being said, I don't think he gets traded. I think they were being truthful about not wanting to have that conversation just yet and holding off and not having it at all this summer. But they do want Jimmy to sort of force the issue and for him to look like the villain if it comes to it. They're fine with that, I think. If Jimmy comes out and forces them to trade him, perfectly okay, perfectly reasonable, as long as they're not the ones initiating those conversations about a trade and it's coming from Jimmy Butler's camp, they're all for it. I think they would like to play out another year with Jimmy and make this decision as late as possible as they possibly can. The question really remains to be seen if Jimmy Butler is okay with that, and we know that he wants the extension immediately. But I personally think they're willing to call Jimmy's bluff of asking for a trade because Jimmy loves it in Miami and he doesn't want to go anywhere. And I think that they end up just waiting it out for a year.
So, you mentioned like with this Miami Heat team, how they've been terrible like with their assets. Why do you think that has been such a thing? Because they let everybody go for nothing. They let Caleb Martin go for nothing. They let Max Strus, Gabe Vincent, and the list goes on. And then also too, why do you think that the Heat culture has somewhat slipped? Because you mentioned if they might just be content with really just being, competitive. So why do you think that the Heat culture has slipped so much?
I mean, I don't think it has to do with the Heat culture. I think it has more so to do with how deep the owners' pockets run. The Heat culture is still intact. They go for the grind guys, not the talented guys. And if they get both, they kind of end up being lucky, like Jimmy or Bam, where they have very talented players on the roster. And when you're asking the question about why did they let guys like Gabe and Max go, Caleb, who's about to go for nothing, and if you were to ask a front office person this question, they'll point to prime games or prime examples in the playoffs where each one of those players performed at such a degree where it propelled them into winning the round or winning the series or winning the game. For example, Caleb Martin, arguably Eastern Conference MVP last year. And they'll just phrase the question back at you this way. Would you rather trade Caleb Martin there for a first rounder, or would you rather win an Eastern Conference Finals with Caleb Martin? And obviously, I think 99% of us will say, yeah, we'll take the Eastern Conference Championship and the Eastern Conference Finals MVP over an extra first round pick. The issue is the year after, right? After he's accomplished those highest of highs, you're not going to pay the guy, move him there.
Yeah.
The list does go on, and we can sit here and talk ad nauseum about why they don't do it, when the simplest answer is they feel like these players will show up when needed in the playoffs. That's the simplest answer. And I've seen these signs from when Goran Dragic went off in the bubble, and I immediately, right after the bubble, I said, trade him for a first. If anyone offers a first for him, you trade him immediately and don't look back. And, it looks foolish at the time, but it ends up being the most sensible move and what leads you to getting in those conversations in terms of assets with the Celtics, with the Nets, the Rockets, the Jazz, but the Heat just aren't in the conversation of being one of those teams.
What's going on, Adam? I have a few questions for you, my man. So the first question would be, have you? The draft is tomorrow, and the Miami Heat have the 15th overall pick. Is there any specific player that you want them to draft, or do you like which route do you think they're going? Do you think they're going to go big, or like add a guard to their roster? And then second would be like free agency. Do you expect any big moves or just minor moves to improve this roster after losing players like Haywood and Caleb Martin?
Yeah, I think that tomorrow will show you exactly what they're looking for in terms of a direction. If they go for a win now player, it signals that they're going to keep Jimmy and they're going to add a veteran piece and go from there. If they go for a young guard, someone who's very unpolished, I think it signals more so the opposite. If you see them trade up, it'll be for Devin Carter. If we see them stay at where they are, it'll be for someone falling like a Ron Holland or a Rob Dillingham. The question for me is if Rob Dillingham is there, he fits the Kentucky category. He's a guard. He can score. He is a clutch agent. Or his agency is clutch. Are you going to fall into that same black hole of the Tyrese Maxey mistake where you end up not taking a guy that you really like because he is a clutch agent? So I think if they stay where they are, you're going to see a pick of Tristan da Silva or one of Ron Holland, maybe Rob Dillingham, if what people are saying is actually coming to fruition and they're looking to change their ways a bit, or Nikola Topic.
Man, I would love to have Topic on our roster just for like future, like for the future, because Terry's not going to be the future guard for us for a while, for the long term. And do you think Topic will be able to play this season, even with that minor ACL procedure? Like, do you think there's a chance, or do you think, with Spo, he kind of takes his time with young players like Jovic, and he was kind of forced into the lineup because of injuries. But do you think if that was the case, he's playing this season?
Yeah, I think he would play. He would assume the backup point guard role immediately, and if he doesn't by the end of the season, he will have that role. I don't perceive a guy like him to be a starter within the first year or two unless there's some sort of major overhaul. But the ACL injury isn't really a concern. I know a lot of doctors and medical personnel with a few teams have checked him off and have cleared him for basketball activities as early as mid-summer league. So I don't think that'll be a concern for him at all.
Okay, and then when you look at the overall, trade aspect, because if we do keep Jimmy, obviously, we have Tyler Hero's contract, Duncan Robinson's contract, and Terry's contract. So what are some realistic moves out there? Because you hear people mention, Zach LaVine and, Donovan Mitchell and all these other things. So what's a realistic move for the Miami Heat if we do keep Jimmy?
I think Brandon Ingram is a prime example of something that's very realistic. They were very interested in him in the past. I could tell you that with absolute certainty. 2 years ago, they were in conversations with Dan Griffin about getting Brandon Ingram on the team, and Brandon Ingram was very okay with that. He welcomed a possible trade. In addition, Griffin really, really, really likes Duncan Robinson.
Really?
And he's one of those players, BI that is, that fit really poorly with BI and with Zion and CJ McCollum. And I think a change of scenery would do him really good. We know he's already on the market, and I'm expecting him to get moved within this week or next week, and I'm expecting the Heat to be a part of those conversations if they're not already. And it really just depends on the price. Is it going to be Terry and Duncan in a first? Is it going to be Tyler in any case, but Tyler doesn't really make sense for the Pels because they already have a very crowded backcourt. So it comes down to the price, but I know for a fact that Jimmy here, Jimmy not here, Brandon Ingram is a low cost guy that they think has a lot of potential that they can grow with.
Okay. Trent, go ahead.
The case and somehow we do land Brandon Ingram, which I'm not a fan of Brandon Ingram, but maybe a new scenery could definitely change some stuff around. Do you think Brandon Ingram and Bam and Tyler, I'm sure he has to be part of that deal. If not, like for the future, because Jimmy's not going to be here. And I actually agree with you when you was talking about Jimmy needs to be traded. I've been saying that for a while now. Do you think Brandon Ingram and Bam can compete in the Eastern Conference after Jimmy is done with the Heat and Jovic and Jaime? Because the Celtics ain't going nowhere, and the Pacers, Magic, they're only going to get better. And New York Knicks, like, do you think we can stay afloat, even though we do have the best coach in the league, but the roster, I'm just not, it's not the best.
Yeah, I hear you. I think you said a few terms in there. You said staying afloat and you said competing. And I think one of them is true and the other is not. Staying afloat, I could definitely see. That to me, BI, Jaime, Jovic, Tyler, if Tyler's still on the roster, Bam, 7 through 10 seed, easily, especially considering you have Spo. Competing, absolutely not. In no way can they compete with a roster like that. That to me smells more like a building block for things to come. BI, Bam, Jaime, that is what you use as your not your cornerstone pieces, but your pieces to build upon. And you're not ready to compete, but you're 2 moves away. You're 2 more players away. And I'm a big proponent of a guy like Brandon Ingram because he is a 20-plus point scorer per game. He's still very young. He still fits that Bam timeline. And he's never been in a situation where a team actually gave him the tools to succeed in the way that I think Spo and the Miami Heat front office could. And so there is a lot of opportunity there for him to mold himself and mold his game because he's still so young. So I'm a proponent of all of that. And if it were to come into fruition, I think that would expedite a Jimmy Butler move even faster because you need to have more space for ball handlers at that point. You can't have Jimmy, BI, Bam, Tyler, Terry, just too many mouths to feed at that point, and you need to make some adjustments.
So a lot of Miami Heat fans say that, they didn't give Jimmy Butler help, but then at the same time, like me personally, I don't think that Jimmy Butler held Kyle Lowry accountable compared to how he held Duncan, Tyler, and Bam. So when you think about giving Jimmy Butler help, because I think they did give Jimmy Butler help and some of it didn't work out, like Victor Oladipo. Just imagine, like, if he was able to stay healthy, I think he would have been a great piece for the Miami Heat. So do you think that the Miami Heat did give him enough help, or did things not work out, or maybe they just didn't, make the right moves?
All of the above. Can I say that?
Yeah.
They made the wrong moves. They didn't give him any help. They made moves thinking that it would help when it really didn't, and it really bit them when it came to it. PJ Tucker being your marquee power forward signing over the last 3 or 4 years, excluding Kevin Love, that's not going to cut it when you have a guy that's taken you to the finals and has taken you to multiple Eastern Conference Finals runs. Kyle Lowry, while if we were to take a time machine and go back in time and ask ourselves if we would still do that move, I would. I would still make that move because you need to have somebody on the books, and I'm okay with having a even if it's an aging Kyle Lowry that really doesn't play all that well, having 30 million on the books for you to be able to move for a different player, which ended up actually happening. It was just for another wrong move. It's something worthwhile, and it's something that they needed to do. So I don't think they gave him the help required to win a championship. I don't even think necessarily they gave him the right players to make it as far as he has in the Eastern Conference. They gave him the right players to sort of make sure that it was just enough for him to carry them to an Eastern Conference Finals.
But why
or
is
to
that
the
though?
finals.
Why is that though? Why?
It's this belief that they know better than the other teams. The Tyler Hero was injured, and if he wasn't injured, we'd win the finals. If Kyle Lowry and Max Strus, when they lost Game 7, weren't injured, they would have won and went to the finals and beat the Warriors. If Max Strus didn't step out on that 3-point shot that he took in Game 7, they would have won the finals. It's just this belief of things that didn't actually happen. If they did happen, you'd have a different result. And they're sort of living in this world where you don't need to go after the big fish. You need to go after the right fish. But at the same time, they're appeasing the ownership of not spending too much. And I think that's the biggest downfall that they've had over the last 5 years, where they sort of look at this roster and go, we just made it to the finals with Jimmy Butler, Bam, and a bunch of undrafteds. Why can't we just do it again, but with an extra first round pick player coming back? Do we really need to make that much of a change? And then I think the media plays a major role in all of this as well, where the perception of what the team should or shouldn't be doing, it sort of molds how the front office approaches giving the fans what they're actually looking for. So when the media tells you, okay, they're not going to make any moves because other teams aren't making any moves, it sort of makes you think, you know what, that's a good point. Maybe the Heat don't need to make a move and they're contending and they're perfectly fine. When we forget about what the real goal is, and it's to win an actual championship, not to say that you participated in the championship round.
Yeah, go ahead, Amir.
So do you think, so in Pat Riley's presser, he said like there's like one of 3 players that might become available that are whales. I don't know if Donovan Mitchell was included in one of those 3 types of players that he would essentially gut the team for, because otherwise he said there's no one really available or anybody worthwhile unless they are a superstar that we want to trade all of our depth for. So there is a sentiment, if we're gonna wait and see and not give Jimmy his extension or trade him this offseason, it seems like we are effectively going to run it back. So do you think it's a higher likelihood that we run it back and say, hey, we didn't really get to see Tyler and Terry? Like, we got to see that in a small sample size of like 10 games. Like, are they going to say, hey, availability was the biggest issue? We were 4 games out of second place, 2 games out of 60. Like, do you think they're going to say, let's run it back? Or do you think there is a likelihood to trade for a Brandon Ingram? Or let's say a Brook Lopez type or a KCP type, or even the PJ Washington Gaffer type guys that Dallas, traded for in the midseason, got over the hump? Or is it going to be realistically, we're going to draft someone at 15 and we're going to probably replace Caleb with like a Torian Prince, like, or someone at a, vet min, and we're going to run it back. So like, how content do you think the Heat are, I guess, for next season with the roster?
They were willing to make a major overhaul in terms of roster last summer when Damian Lillard was available, and losing in the first round doesn't sort of make you sit there and go, okay, you know what, we're okay with what we have. We're going to stick with the roster. I think we're at this point now where if there isn't a major overhaul, give up. Front office should be laid off. Everyone should be fired. We're at that point right now where if a gigantic move of at least 2 starters are not being moved and changed, you need to seriously look at the front office and say, is it time to make a major overhaul in that regard?
Well, thank you so much again, Adam. Please let the people know where they can find you.
You can find me on Twitter at Adam N. Barai.
And YouTube, anything? With
Nope.
the basement? No.
Nope, nothing else. We don't cash the checks over at the basement. I'm just there to support.
Got you. All right. Well, guys, thank you guys so much for tuning in. And once again, Adam, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you guys for having me, and let's do this again soon.
Absolutely.